Hello and welcome to Focus on Gaza, a new weekly show which will provide insights into the lives of ordinary Gazans and analysis of the big issues affecting them. I'm Imran Garda. The war on Gaza claimed over 1,300 lives, including over 400 women and children. The Israeli military has consistently denied that it targeted civilians during the war. But as Al Jazeera discovered in this exclusive investigation, there is compelling evidence to suggest that innocent people were deliberately killed. Ayman Mohyeldin, who was in Gaza throughout the war, uncovers some startling revelations.
In 1949, the newly formed state of Israel, many of whose citizens had been victims of Nazi war crimes, signed the Geneva Convention on the Protection of Civilians in time of war. But in Israel's war on Gaza, there's compelling evidence to suggest that these noble sentiments were ignored and that the Israeli military disregarded the laws of war. Throughout this investigation, we have gathered compelling testimonies from eyewitnesses, victims' relatives, neighbors, and human rights experts. Time and time again, we've been told the story of a woman carrying a baby and a white flag being shot in the head in broad daylight by an Israeli soldier. And all of the people that we've spoken to have concluded one fact: the village of Khuzaa was a scene of a war crime. All that remains of Rouhia al-Najjar, the 37-year-old mother of Hiba and wife of Nasser, is the photograph taken for her recent pilgrimage to Mecca. A native of Gaza, she had lived her entire life through conflict, and her life was to end on the 13th of January 2009 in an act of war.
For 2 or 3 days before that day, they had been firing phosphorus bombs randomly, but they weren't targeting our neighborhood. They were actually firing from here. So we could see the bombs flying over our heads and falling in different areas.
This substance, which burns on contact with air, can legitimately be used as a battlefield smokescreen, but had allegedly been used here as an instrument of terror against the local population, setting fires to homes and people. Barefoot children still burn themselves on the phosphorus, which was dropped in vast quantities the night before Rouhia's murder. Just as the men are eager to show us phosphorus shells that landed in their fields, children compete to demonstrate just how lethal the properties of this strange new weapon are. When we warned them of the dangers of picking up the phosphorus, one small boy asked us, "What does it matter? We are all already dead." A sense of fatalism brought on by experience. White phosphorus may have become infamous as a result of its use in Gaza, but it was by no means the only weapon at the disposal of the Israeli military.
We used to think that this area is safe because there were no resistance fighters here. They used to bulldoze farms and agricultural lands and then leave. We didn't expect them to demolish houses. We didn't expect this extent of criminality.
In Khuzaa, the villagers were used to living under the guns of the Israeli watchtowers, and in the first 2 weeks of the war had become accustomed to the artillery and airstrikes. But the night before Rouhia's murder, it became clear that this was something different.
We thought at first it was the usual firing of bombs overhead, but then my neighbor Rawhiya started calling me. She was shouting to us that our homes were burning. We went out, and the smoke was like fog covering everything. Every house received their share of phosphorus bombs. Rawhiya was trying to put out the fire at her house, and other neighbors were doing the same. Then she told me, "Hurry up, your house is on fire." I ran to the house, but it was all on fire.
The shelling was considered a precursor to a ground attack, so Rawhiya's husband Nasser, along with many others, decided to leave the area, fearing the men in the village would be taken prisoners by the Israelis. He tried to persuade his wife to join him.
She said she doesn't want to leave her house, and that if she was going to die, if they were going to kill her, she would rather die in her own house. She said the white flags represent peace, so they won't harm us. But they didn't respect the white flag.
Their daughter, Hiba, chose to stay with her mother and to help look after the house and those wounded in the attack.
When they were done putting out the fire, our neighbours started coughing because the phosphorus emissions were suffocating him. So my mum grabbed a towel and soaked it with water because we had been told that water helps.
The special forces had taken the high building and alleyways while we were putting out the fires. They later told the prisoners they took that we saw you trying to put out the fires, but we didn't see you carrying any weapons. They told them that if you had been carrying weapons, we would have wiped you out.
Khuzaa was shut off from the outside world. To the east, tanks and bulldozers. To the west, Israeli special forces. The villagers, now mostly old men, women and children, sheltered together in larger houses, but neither the size of the buildings nor the white flags were to offer any protection.
The sun had not yet come up. It was still early when we heard our neighbor scream. So I shouted, "What's wrong?" And she said, "They're demolishing the house from the front while we are still inside."
And then they reached the wall of our house. So we tried to escape from the window. We all escaped and gathered in this empty square behind me.
As the bulldozers began to level the houses, Ayman's 16-year-old brother Muhammad was taken hostage by Israeli soldiers. They led him to the opposite end of the main street, where he was bound and blindfolded.
The place where you are sitting now was originally a staircase, but they leveled it and placed a mattress on it. Then a soldier laid down on his stomach here. I was hearing everything that was happening, and when they were taking me to the toilet, they took off the blindfold and untied my hands so I could see a few things.
The soldiers seemed relaxed, singing to pass the time and forcing their hostages to do the same.
They asked me to sing along with them, but I refused. They were still talking to me in Hebrew, but one of them was translating. And he said to me that if I don't do what they ask, they will kill me. So I did what they asked. I started to sing with them until they retreated.
It was now 7:30 a.m., and at the opposite end of the street, bulldozers and tanks were leveling the houses.
They were destroying them like you crush a matchbox. And we stood there watching. The soldier that was in the bulldozer was laughing. He was chewing gum and laughing. He turned the head of the bulldozer towards us in a playful manner, as though he was telling us, "You're all going to die."
We all gathered here, but then the bulldozers reached the walls of the house here that was right next to us. So we started to escape. Just before that, the Israelis had gathered the men and told them that we had to evacuate the area within half an hour. But it seemed like they hadn't spoken with the special forces.
Increasingly hemmed in and fearing for their lives, around 15 of the women and children decided that they had no choice but to try.
Rawhiya was leading them. She said if all the women and children start moving out, then everyone else could follow afterwards. So she distributed white flags and led them out. She walked at the front, carrying a white flag, followed by other women carrying their children.
When we reached the top of the road, the special forces that were positioned in a house right opposite to us. They took us by surprise.
But despite the presence of children and the display of white flags, the military opened fire.
I was right next to her, a centimetre away. Our neighbour was also walking next to her. She was holding up her child as though a flag. Then he shot her. He shot her and she immediately fell to the ground.
A bullet hit Rawhiya in the head. It entered through one side and went out through the other. I took a bullet in the foot.
At the far end of the street, Mohammed, still tied and blindfolded, heard the shots a few meters from where he was held.
I was really scared. I was worried that something was going to happen to my family. I heard the shots being fired at Rawhiya and I heard her scream, "God is great." But that scared me more because it meant that they were killing people, and I thought that they were going to kill me when they started pulling out.
Yasmin, who had been walking with Rawhiya, rushed to her aid.
I was so close to her, but there were special forces in front of me. They started shooting at me again, and the bullets were passing over my head. But they didn't get me this time. Only a small splinter of metal that stuck in my arm.
I immediately knew that she died. I told the women she's gone. My mother died. They were trying to comfort me by saying she's going to be fine. But I shouted at them, "She's gone. She's dead. I know she's dead."
In the nearby town of Khan Yunis, Marwan Abu Raida, a paramedic at the Nasser hospital, was finishing his first call out of the day when he received the call sending him to Khuzaa.
I drove straight there. I was still 60 to 70 meters away from the body when what I think were Israeli special forces started shooting at me. I felt powerless. There was nothing I could do for her. My understanding was that the medical teams were protected under international law and ethics. Medical teams should be protected and they should have freedom of movement and work because they are human service teams.
With the emergency services unable to help them and bulldozers closing in, the women made frantic appeals for help, some of which aired live on the midday news.
A couple of radio stations called us, and we tried to echo our voice and call upon the world to find a solution for us, or to at least save Rawhiya. We didn't know at this point if she was still alive or dead.
We were screaming and holding out white flags so they would see us and not demolish the house with us inside. But they didn't care. It made no difference to them. They started collapsing the walls with us inside.
No one answered our calls for help. At the end, we decided to go out together and face the bombardment. The way we saw it was that it was better to walk into the fire than stay here and die under the rubble. If we went out, some of us might get hit and some of us might die. But at least someone would make it out alive to tell our story to the outside world.
We went through that alleyway, but just as I was about to pass across an exit in the road, followed by the rest of the neighborhood, they started shooting at us again. So everyone went in one of the houses on the street and they were stuck there. But I kept running for about 300 meters until I reached an ambulance and paramedics were waiting for us.
6 hours later, the Israeli army began to withdraw, leaving Mohammed tied up in the house and Rawhiya's body in the street.
They were starting to pull out of the area, and so they told us, when you hear a few gunshots being fired, you can leave. They didn't want anyone to see them. They didn't want to bring attention to themselves.
I ran out to the ambulance and headed towards the body of the martyr, who was dead by then. She bled to death. After she was lying there for about 12 hours, I took the body, which was in horrible condition, and headed to Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. You could tell she was killed intentionally, because she received only one shot straight to the head, so it was obvious that the sniper meant to kill her. I wish the International Court of Justice will take action against those who committed these crimes. because what we witnessed here is unbelievable terror.
Across Gaza, the withdrawal of Israeli troops has allowed life to return to normal, or what passes for normal in this giant outdoor prison. Khuzaa has in some respects been fortunate. Some of the houses are still standing. Others have been reduced to piles of rubble that people sift through in the hope of recovering a few possessions. Most of the animals were killed in the Israeli assault, the villagers say deliberately, and the few remaining sheep are now penned away from the watchtowers for fear they too will be shot. No one can work the fields, and any movement beyond the ruined houses instantly attracts the attention of Israeli patrols. Where farmlands once stretched, nothing remains. Only the tracks of the tanks and bulldozers crisscrossing what was once a citrus grove.
Okay. So you came here?
Yes.
But Khuzaa has not been forgotten.
Was here?
That house.
And they were shooting also?
Fred Abrams is an analyst for the US-based non-governmental organization Human Rights Watch, which investigates human rights violations across the globe.
But you saw only one.
He has been researching white flag killings in Gaza during the course of this conflict.
Our job is to look at how the parties to the conflict, Israel and Hamas, respected or disrespected international law. And there's such a long list of issues, but this case seems to be quite clear-cut, and that's why we focused on it. All the evidence so far suggests that she was shot in plain sight. It was daylight. They saw the flag, and if proven, that would be a war crime.
It's not easy for investigators to build a picture of exactly what happened. The recollections of people under artillery and sniper fire are often contradictory, but in the case of Rawhiya's killing, there is a remarkable consistency.
There are a couple of issues that are interesting about this case. First is the bulldozers and tanks had reached the edge of the village and were ordering people to go into the center. And we know that. I've now interviewed 7 people independently and separately who all testified to that. So they were ordered to leave. But when they came here, they came under fire. So, maybe that's just bad coordination within the military's part. But I believe all the evidence suggests the IDF had firm control of this area at the time of the incident. They were not coming under fire. And so a group of 15 women walked forward waving white flags. And this is a clear open space. I believe that the IDF soldier was based in this house it's a straight shot about 200 meters away. He could have seen them. I don't believe they were running. They were walking forward. Everybody testified. There were probably 10 seconds at least when he saw them. And in our view, then they're obliged to take every effort to, not to target civilians and to distinguish between fighters and civilians. In this case, I don't see why they would have thought that these women would be a risk or a threat to them.
Nasser has obtained a death certificate from the examining doctor, confirming the paramedics' earlier diagnosis that Rawhiya's death was caused by a single shot to the head.
From PCHR.
A GPS calculation of the distance suggests that she was shot at 120 meters. This, together with Fred's findings in other parts of Gaza, have led him to a conclusion which, if correct, would point to a war crime implicating not only the soldier responsible, but the entire Israeli military chain of command.
The IDF, like all militaries, do not publicize their specific rules of engagement. But in research in Gaza that I've done now for the past 2 years, we found often they create certain kill zones. In other words, when they are based in a house, there are sometimes orders, it seems to us, based on the evidence, that anyone who gets within a certain range, say 100 meters, it can be fired upon. That is my hypothesis at this moment.
Despite the significance of Fred Abrams' initial conclusions, there is little Human Rights Watch can do beyond publishing their report.
We don't have any faith in the Israeli military's willingness to investigate itself, long record of failing to investigate. There should be an international investigation. It's going to be difficult. I mean, our job at Human Rights Watch is to document it scrupulously, to publicize it, and to try and encourage some sort of accountability mechanism.
For Rawhiya's friends and relatives, this provides little comfort.
I used to believe that there are international laws and that there are international courts that prevent Israel from abusing the rights of humans. I have learned that Israel can do anything it wants without being punished, without anyone stopping it or even asking it why. Israel can kill, demolish houses, destroy trees, and wreck not only a small neighborhood or village, but an entire country, without anyone stepping in. The Security Council can't stop it, nor can an international organization. That's what I learned.
Nasser is doing what he can to look after his daughter, but there is still so much that reminds them of Rawhiya. Their house overlooks the spot where she was killed, and the writing on the garden wall still welcomes her back from her pilgrimage to Mecca. Nasser also keeps the white flag that failed to protect her from the Israeli bullet. Her bloodstains are still visible. For him, tangible proof of the crime that was committed.
My heart is wounded. It fills me with sorrow to look at the place where she died. We spent a lifetime together. She was my friend and companion since I was just 17 years old. But what can I say?
Hiba has built a small memorial where her mother died.
Her daughter built this so no one steps on her mother's blood that was left on the street.
I thought about what she used to say about staying strong and steadfast. When people called us and told us to leave, we used to tell them that we will stay here and we will stay strong.
Since the 2006 parliamentary elections that swept Hamas into power, the people of Gaza have been living under siege. Their elected representatives have been denied the right to govern, and the people have been deprived of their most basic freedoms. Now, Gazans fear they will also be deprived of any justice for the crimes they've endured.
We, who have 1,300 martyrs and 10,000 prisoners, are neglected, and no one asks about us. Let someone say a word of justice. Does anybody care about us?
Whenever the bombardment or gunfire starts, we stay inside our houses. We can't go out. It is not fair what they are doing to us. We are imprisoned in our homes. We go from home to school, from school to home. What did we do wrong?
Ban Ki-moon, the United Nations Secretary General, described the attacks on civilians in Gaza as shocking and totally unacceptable, calling for a thorough investigation, full explanation, and accountability in all cases of civilian deaths. If he is as good as his word, Khuzaa seems a good place to start.
Human Rights Watch is currently compiling a report into allegations of war crimes in Gaza. We'll bring you their findings in the weeks ahead. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you at the same time next week.